All right, great. Well, welcome again, everyone. My name is Kate Rademacher, and for those of you who haven't heard, recently uh, had the honor and privilege of taking over leadership of Writing for Your Life from Brian Elaine, who have founded the platform. So I'm really thrilled and excited to be more involved with the organization. I've been a colleague and friend of Brian's for many years, and really thrilled to be in this new role. And especially excited because we have David Morris here tonight, who's our guest speaker for the second Tuesday Writing for Life Writers Discussion Group. Thank you so much, David, for being here. So just a couple of housekeeping items. We're going to ask David to speak. He has about 20 minutes or so of remarks. And then we're going to open it up for questions and discussion. So please be noting your questions. We encourage active participation. Before we while David's speaking, and if you're not speaking, I would ask that you stay on mute just to limit background noise. And again, as most of you saw, we are recording this session. So David, thank you so much for being here. I'm just going to read your bio and then I'll hand it over to you if that sounds good.
Awesome.
Um, so just briefly, for those of you who don't know David Morris is an accomplished publishing professional with more than 25 years of experience. He worked at Zondervan of HarperCollins and Guideposts at the executive level. He has a PhD in religious studies, and he really helps both new voices and premier authors build on their strengths for bigger impact. He's worked as a coach and an agent, and he's founded Lake Drive Books, which supports publishing authors. And maybe you might want to say a few more words about Lake Drive Books, David. So I'm just thrilled. I've met David as part of this transition. We've had a fabulous several conversations, and really just thrilled to have you here, David. And you're going to be talking about writing for the let's see, what did we say? Writing to the spiritual needs of our time, which I think is the topic that we all, at least I'm very eager to hear you speak about. So really grateful for your time and you being with us. So over to you, David.
Thanks, Kate. It's great to be here. Great to be part of what Writing for Your Life does. I'm in such admiration of all the work Brian Elaine's done, and so looking forward, Kate, to what's to come. Yeah, I'm coming at you from Grand Rapids. My bedtime is in about an hour, so we only have an hour here. I'm keeping after it. I could talk about publishing all night long, so stop me, but I do want to get some discussion here. So counting on each one of you for that. I'd like to just sort of invite you a little bit to, let's pretend it's a book club meeting or a church meeting at night. And we've all got our ideas going, and we're being ourselves, and we're being authentic with each other. I know we don't know each other well, but I invite you to kind of open your minds up a little bit and just sort of think expansively and creatively here. I mean, I could talk about book proposals. I could talk about the publishing business, but that could be for another time. I will be there in March, and I will be doing some of that in the Atlanta conference. Just a little bit about me. I play the guitar. I learned how to play it right-handed, like most people, but I'm left-handed, so I tried to learn how to play it left-handed, so I can play the guitar both ways. Now you know me a little bit. I've been in publishing for 30 years and didn't plan on it. It's one of those accidental professions for some of us, and I learned a lot. It was a big time of transition for the publishing industry, mainly that we lost a lot of bookstores in that time. It's the digital revolution that happened, and that really changed the complexion of the publishing business. It was quite disruptive for it. But one thing that has always been true, and it manifests itself in different ways, is that books work sometimes in ways that we don't understand. They take on a life of their own. And I'd like to just talk about that a little bit. Why do books work? Once with a publishing team I worked with, we actually did a little analysis on what makes for a bestseller. So I'll be drawing on that a little bit, I guess. I'd like to say that sometimes a book works because a culture claims it. There's a need out there. Now, sometimes it claims that book because, well, people want something easy. They want something fun. They want something that tells them they're going to be fine, everything's okay, or something that will entertain them. Those aren't always great books, but they're very commercial and they sell really well. And some of us, probably most of us, would like to write one of those so that we could pay the bills and go and write some of the other stuff. But that explains part of why some books work so well. And I'm not going to name any names, at least in that category. Then there's books that work strictly because of platform, because of celebrity basis. Michelle Obama's book a year ago was just out of this world in terms of sales. And I'm not trying to say anything about the literary merits or cultural merits or political merits of that book. Is everybody on mute? There we go. But it is a book that just was driven very much by, you want to know who this person was and who this person is. And there's a lot of that these days. I will tell you, in big, large scale publishing, because we've lost so many bookstores, the author's platform matters more than it ever has. And that's just a fact. And I think that authors feel a lot of pressure about that, because now they've got to perform in ways they didn't used to. And that's true, actually. But I think it also puts a lot of power into the hands of the authors. And we're still all figuring out what that means. Maybe it means better royalties for authors. I'm an advocate for that. But sometimes there are books that just are, they're just enlightening. And somehow they work. It's one of the most extraordinary things to me about books, because books can be so commercial and be such big bestsellers. And yeah, sometimes they get on a flywheel and the world just claims it. But I can't explain The Body Keeps the Score that stays on the bestseller list all this time. I mean, that to me is a really fat book. I have psychology training in my background. I don't even want to read that book. I just want the Cliff Notes, And yet it's captured the imagination of our reading public. And that guy, I don't know a lot about the author, but he looks like he's an academic. He's got a very European name. Why is that book working? Well, that's one of the cool things about books. There's books out there where you kind of look at that and you go, why is that book working? But if you think about it, there are reasons. When you dig into it, you can kind of get underneath it and see what's going on. And I will say, sometimes a lot of books, even a book like that, sometimes gets a break somewhere along the way. It gets like a great publicity hit that just no one ever counted on, and that really kind of made it get going. Sometimes you can't explain it. But that's what I like to talk about. I like to think as a publisher, and I've experience as a publisher, and I am one now, in a whole new way. And I'll talk about that a little bit maybe later. But you want to know what's going to make a book work. Publishers, we're always acquisitions editors. We're always trying to figure out and parse out what's going to make a book connect with the audience that's out there. So we become, and what I encourage any writer to do is to try to become, a student of what we call felt needs or emotional needs. What is it that's going on in the world that we're in today? I had a colleague once after 9/11 said, well, anxiety is the big issue of the day. How do you calm people down? You might say the current political season we've been in the last 2 years is an issue for, and what does that mean? Is it about maybe having conversations and community and identity? So I would like to just take a few minutes here and kind of go through a few bestsellers and just give you some examples and sort of how I interpret it and how how this muscle can work for all of us. And I don't have all the answers. I definitely don't. I ask people all the time. My wife was reading a popular book that I'll talk about in a second. And I asked her, why do you think that worked? Because I don't understand it. But let's go back. Here's one that I love quite a bit, The Cloister Walk by Kathleen Norris. And this was her story of a woman with a thoroughly Protestant background, often more doubt than faith, be drawn into the ancient practice of monasticism, to a community of celibate men whose days are centered around a rigid schedule of prayer, work, and scripture. How did she do that? She writes in one of her books, and I don't know if it was this one, that she was really struggling with doubt from her upbringing in the Presbyterian tradition, that she would go into a church and she would feel nauseous when creeds were read. You know, it can be a physical reaction. And yet there was something about this monastery where they just told her, don't worry about what you're praying or who you're praying to, just pray. And that brought a sense of peace and community to her. You know, she's a poet, she's a literary person, and I think somehow she just wrote so beautifully and captured that sense of ongoing doubt that so many of us struggle with, that she worked really well. Let me move forward a little bit to Barbara Brown Taylor and her book, Leaving Church. She's speaking, right, Kate, at the March conference. She'll be there. A Memoir of Faith. This book talks about how Barbara suffered a compassion fatigue. You know, the copy doesn't actually explain what that means. You got to read the book. But compassion fatigue. Some of you are church leaders here, I assume, and you might know what that is. But why her? Why did it happen for her? What was the confluence of things? She's connected to a bigger, wider world, and yet she would stand at the back of the church as people were leaving, and tears would start coming down her face, as she describes in her story. Why is that? Why would those tears? Why would her life experience elicit those tears in a very unexplainable way? And somehow she captured something that a lot of us are feeling by telling that story. Let's keep moving here. I'm kind of going from further back to, now I'm going to zoom a little bit more forward. Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance, who had a successful run in, I think it was Pennsylvania, or no, Ohio. That's where he's from, correct? Yeah. A Memoir of Family and Culture in Crisis. He explains what rural poverty is all about. And this was right after Trump was elected that this book became such a bestseller, because I think so many people thought, well, this helps explains the dissatisfaction, the frustration that drove so much of the sense of identity, American identity, perhaps rural identity. So that book touched on something there, and people really dug it. And you know, sometimes I read this book and I'm not remembering how well it was written. Sometimes these things get claimed, but they're not that well written. And once you get inside, anybody have that experience? Like, you hear a lot of great things about a book and you open it up and go, well, I could have written this. Well, you know what? You probably could have. I've met a lot of authors. Trust me, you probably could have. Let's keep going forward to, here's a book that's really been on the bestseller list. And it's one of those ones, I don't know why. I just don't know. I don't know how, something got it going, but it's Educated, a memoir by Tara Westover. And this is the book my wife just read. And it tells the story of Tara growing up in a fundamentalist Mormon family in I believe, a very rural, if not remote, part of Utah. And correct me if I'm wrong. And she, there's just some crazy storytelling, for one thing, which is what drives a lot of memoir quite often. And she did really well in school, went to Brigham Young University, and from there to, I'm gonna mess this up, but to either it was Cambridge or Oxford in England, and eventually got a PhD. And just, to me, it's a story of overcoming, but it's also part of the really crazy story. But there's also a lot of stuff in here about a very authoritarian father, a very patriarchal system. It really touches on what I think women in particular perhaps are struggling with. So I hope this is starting to spur a few thoughts. Here's a book that I worked on, Present Over Perfect, Leaving Behind Frantic for a Simpler, More Soulful Way of Living by Shauna Niequist. This was Shauna's third or fourth book. And I'll tell you, her sales went from, down here up, and then this book came out and it just exploded. And it's basically a simple premise of, let's stop trying to be perfect. Let's stop trying to be showy in our faith or in who we are as people, and just be present to each other. And it was a very compelling book. Did very, very well for her. Hit the New York Times. This was a Zondervan book. But I also, this is me interpreting it. Shauna also came from she's the daughter of a very famous megachurch pastor who had a controversy that popped up not too long ago that you may know about. And I think it's very much also about, it's her treatise about performative Christianity that makes you try really hard to prove yourself, to put on a really big show. And it's there. That's a big part of Christianity in the United States. And if anyone has experienced some of that as a kid, Shauna is one of them. So I think that's something she's writing to now. I'm psychoanalyzing a little bit. I realize that. But like I said at the very beginning, you try to figure out what it is that's really capturing people's imagination here. And I think Shauna knew something about her audience and knew about a great concept to write about. This is the book that nobody understands why it's working so well. This is Jesus and John Wayne, How White Evangelicals Corrupted a Faith and Fractured a Nation by Kristen Kobes-Dume, professor of the history of religion at Calvin University here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Been on the New York Times bestseller list, still in the top 10,000 ranking of Amazon. It's sold really, really quite well. And it's it doesn't have a lot of commentary in it, honestly, not a ton of analysis, which the author herself would say. But what she does do is she offers a history of well, I would say it's a history of authoritarianism, of patriarchy, of masculinity. She talks about John Eldredge in the very beginning here, in evangelical Christianity in particular. And she just kind of brought out all the receipts, brought out all the experiences, and people claim this book. I'm not here advocating for it, yes or no. I'm saying people really claim this book. I know some of you might advocate one way or the other, because maybe it was a little controversial. I love this book. This is not a bestseller. I just want to talk about this book for a second. It's called Work, Pray, Code: When Work Becomes Religion in Silicon Valley by Carolyn Chen. She's also an academic. This is actually from Princeton University Press. This is a very cool book. It's extremely dense. It's academic reporting, but you know what it talks about? It talks about how there is sort of a movement of spirituality within big tech companies. And I think this is relevant because so much of what's gone on in our world recently, politically, socially, is a great shift of cultural and social and financial power to a young technocratic elite. That's one of the things that's just flipped in our world. So now that, Democrats are Republicans and Republicans are Democrats. People who used to be Democrats are now Republican. People who used to be Republican are now Democrats. This book helps explain some of that, why things just got so flipped around. Now, I know I'm getting into kind of like deep and kind of scary stuff, and it's not always spiritual here, but you're kind of getting the idea for the muscle. How do you look at the world? How do you see what's going on? What do you think these books are touching on that really help us interpret the world that we're living in? I could talk about some others. but let me just kind of keep moving here because we're at 23 minutes past the hour. I would say that, you know, for me personally, let me just talk about me. I would say that one of the things I'm most interested in, and this is what I try to do at Lake Drive Books, it's what I try to do with the authors that I agent. And I do both of those things because I try to focus on more of a specific need, and that's disenchantment with religion. You know, that's just something that is like an ongoing thing, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard the studies about from the Pew Forum, the Pew Religious Landscape Study about the rise of the nones, the NONES, people who say that they're no longer affiliated. So many of us know how churches have less attendance frequency, you know, fewer people are showing up. And I've studied that. That was part of my graduate study work for the last 20 years. And it's always been something that's on my mind. So it's an audience that is looking for answers. It's an audience that has lost a sense of community, which is kind of something maybe we're all feeling in one way or another. Maybe we're on one side of that fence or we're on this side of that fence, but we're all still feeling some of these same things. You know, I very much try to work with authors who are trying to help us sort of interpret what that is. And I think it's very much a matter of identity. You know, who are we? Who have we been? And who are we? I think in the case of the United States, it's not so much about having one narrative about who we are, or one meta narrative, but maybe a number of them, and how do we all get along in that way? I think that we struggle with a sense of depletedness. We have so many choices, and we're just struggling to kind of keep up with everything that's going on, and we really desperately need a sense of peace. But that's hard to do when you don't have community, when you don't have identity. You're kind of bouncing around. And I think it's also a time of really big disruption. And maybe, maybe there's a skill that we need to learn in there, and that you as spiritual writers can help people understand disruption. I was having, and I'll end with this. I was having a chat with my 27-year-old daughter over the holidays. And we had a nice breakfast at the diner here in Michigan. They don't really have diners here, but it's the closest thing. And I'm from New Jersey, so where they do have diners. And she's struggling a little bit in her job. She works for a major theater in the Huntington Theater, actually in Boston. And she looks at her boss, who followed a career track similar to the one that she's on, but only earlier, where they went and got the same kind of degree and stuck with this particular job for a while. And she sees how hard, how much hustling her boss has to do, how frantic she is. And she also said, "Dad, I feel like if I left this job, nobody would notice. Nobody would care." And she's seeing it already, where this institution that actually started as an underground theater movement in the 60s now is a major theater in Boston that has a lot of big donors, and that's part of her job, is to help bring those donors in and make them happy. She's seeing how it's not taking care, this institution is not taking care of its own. And she says, "Dad, I think I need to just go freelance. I know the whole world can't be made up of freelancers, but I feel like something new needs to happen." And I was looking across the table thinking, that's exactly what I'm doing too, Elena. And you might be 27 and I'm in my 50s. And I've seen that in publishing. It's the same thing. There's this like really top heaviness that's going on right now. And so I think that's an issue. How do we as spiritual writers address that? There's a problem, and then there's a task. What is that task that people need to do? What do they need help with finding their way forward. And it could look very different for each one of you here, depending on where you are in your context. And, I would just love to put it to any of you to, kind of volunteer. What is it that, if you're on a writing project right now, if you're puzzling something out and you're coming to, or you're thinking about how you're going to end your book, what is it that you think people are going to want to take? What do you want people to take away from it? What do you want them to learn? And there's no right answer or wrong answer here. But I've certainly talked enough, and I'd love to hear any reaction to what I've said. Response to that is fine as well. But I'd really like to hear what you think is going on out there. What are people trying to solve?
So much, David. Well, my brain is buzzing with thoughts, and for those of you who joined a little bit late, we have about 30 minutes for discussion and Q&A. And David at the beginning really invited us to see this as a true time for conversation and connection. David, maybe I can start us off with a question back to you, and then people maybe can answer your question to us. When you and I were emailing about this topic, you said something that was really provocative to me. So I want to just bring that to the group, which is a question for you, and I'd be interested in you expanding on it, which is, do you think that publishers sort of have this big questions in mind, and then they want writers to sort of, they want to recruit writers or find writers that can speak to those topics? Or do you think that publishers are really hoping and expecting and waiting for writers to come forward with what the thought leadership and sort of what's the next? So I guess the question is, do you see us as writers being responsive to what publishers want, or that we really need to set the pace and sort of provide that thought leadership?
I think it starts with the writers, because those of us in publishing we're more the technicians. If I had to sort of like parse it out one way or the other, I like to think I know everything as a publisher, and I want to, I want to guide and direct. But the best work, I think, even comes out when it's a collaborative process, editorially, intellectually, culturally, between the writer and the editor. If there can be an openness to that, if the editor is not too busy and can really sink into a manuscript, and if a writer's open to having this sort of interlocutor, I think that every editor I know, acquisitions editor, well, many of them anyway, are very much engaged in their work. And but I really do think that and we kind of see what's happening in bigger patterns, but we're not down into the particularities as much. And as a writer, you're immersed in your content. And I think that's where it has to start, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. If anybody wants to jump in with a comment or a question, you can either raise your hand, just come off mute, or type in the chat. Any or all of the above.
I'll ask a
Anybody?
question. This is
Yeah,
Shar
please.
speaking. I don't know if you can see me waving my hand.
Yeah, we can see. Yep.
I guess a question I have for you would be, do you see that non-Christian publishers and non-Christian like film and book, that Christianity is showing up in a kind of a more casual way than it used to? I feel like that's something that I've been observing, watching movies and reading books, that it doesn't seem like there's talk of Christianity, there's a Christian character, this has to be in a Christian world or whatever. It feels like there's a little more enmeshment, and I ask that partly because I think the book that I am writing it's almost too heathen for Christians, but too Christian for heathens. And so it's like, oh, is there an audience for this?
The audience, absolutely. One of the things I often say is that in this country, a lot of our common dialogue hasn't always included a faith point of view. And yet you look at the surveys and, you know, a very large percentage of people have certain religious beliefs, especially if you throw in all the different traditions. It's a very high proportion. So why don't we talk about religion more from whatever context that we're coming from? So I think in terms of the audience, yes. I would say though that you know, the big five publishers, the big publishers in New York, that it's much more segmented, and I think it still is. When I worked at Harper Christian, Zondervan was part of Harper Christian, which was based in Nashville. We would talk a lot about Heartland America and how the New York houses didn't always get that, and we'd have books that would work, and they would understand why. Well, it's, you know, it's because they're you know, there's perhaps some artificial separations. And I would also say too that a lot of the New York houses, they don't understand, you know, they don't understand which podcasts to get an author who's more of a spiritual writer, to which podcast to get you on. They don't know what publicity mediums to get you to. They don't understand the networks that you may have built up and the audience that you may have built up, whether it's social media or it's an institutional network. That's not, you know, that's not part of their purview. And I think in this disrupted publishing environment that we're in, where so much is, you can do so much DIY as an author, it's really flipping all that around right now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you.
And I see a note that Sarah had her hand up. We have two Sarahs. Sarah, do either of Sarahs want to jump in, or maybe that was Shar? Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
I see now. Sarah. Hey, Sarah. Yep.
I just saw Vicky. Hey, Vicky. Hi, David. I have two questions, and I think I will go ahead and link them. One is, I was wondering, just your opinion, like how much to engage with like anger and arguing, like even in like Facebook comments or just as a book, like justice themes. Do you have any opinion on that? Should we be like resolving that on our own and then writing out of like love and peace? And then the second thing could be related. How much should we think about later audiences and how our work could come across to them? Should we write for these times and then whatever happens, happens, or like be considerate of like children or posterity or something?
Sure, Sarah. Thank you for those questions. You know, in terms of anger, I you know, that's a big question. I think that there's absolutely, you've got to, there's a place for showing anger in books. You have to be careful on social media because it can be so, you know, easily misinterpreted. Sometimes it's better if you're in a safer environment, a smaller environment, obviously. But yeah, I mean, I think authenticity is so important. And to be able to not feel as though you can't express yourself. I think that's part of our issue right now is, and so I think that's really key. In terms of writing for posterity, you know, it's funny. I think a lot of books, you know, they last a long time, they get claimed, but you don't hear about them as much. Some of them you hear about less than others. And I think that you definitely want to write something that will last, that has what we call staying power, or has legs. So that usually means just really good writing, you know, just beautiful writing. I think that's probably your best shot at making something work from a posterity point of view. Everything's going to get a little bit dated, by the way. Read some Frederick Buechner. It can get dated sometimes.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Sarah. I see a hand from Deborah.
Hi, thank you. So I'm very good at the short format, 2,000 words a week / sermon. I'm a pastor, but I'm also so I'm looking at, I feel like this question about what people need, what they're working through, because I've pastored in California and in the Midwest and on the East Coast, and kind of, I feel like I've got a good handle on that. And I'm trying personally to break beyond the weekly sermon and get into a deeper format. I think that mine's more of a technical question, I guess. I'm sort of struggling with process and like, I write something 2,000 words and I'm done, so I'm maybe some words of advice about that, because I'm really appreciating this idea of going deeper into this stuff around disruption. I'm preaching a lot about that. I'm preaching a lot about people's sense of a lack of peace. Those are very resonant with where I've been preaching for about the last 10 years.
So your question is too, like the sermon format, it only allows you a certain amount of time, certain amount of words. Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, from a church leader point of view, you could probably brainstorm that better than I could in terms of like, maybe it's a 6-week study or something like that. A lecture, maybe frame it more as a lecture. I would also recommend definitely an e-newsletter. I think that's a great way to reach people. I know that's something from an author platforming point of view, people like me talk about a lot, but one of the things I've learned a lot about that lately is the kind of engagement those newsletters can create. It's not just about book sales, but if you start a newsletter, you're going to find people are going to start writing back to you and tell their stories sometimes. But it can be a very good medium, actually.
To the move up, the junk that's happening at Twitter has moved me into Substack now, so I'm going to start exploring there as well.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You're welcome. I'm sure it was helpful, but
Thanks, Deborah. Kyle, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, and just kind of dovetailing on that. So I have the a monthly newsletter, and I write on, I call it disillusionment, but I call it discouragement. And I think one of the things that people are, I guess, through this this wave, people have I think recognized that the life of faith isn't always happy clappy. And so often we talk about the life of faith as happy clappy, rainbow and roses. And yet I know so many people in my ministry who are always facing this haunting question of how come my prayer life, Bible life, God life, devotional life doesn't match the happy clappy that I hear in sermons all the time. And so I've been writing on that for a couple of years now, and now I'm getting more and more comments, about the newsletter, people emailing me, and literally yesterday, somebody saying, I haven't felt God's love in my life for 43 years. Kind of thank you for articulating what I'm kind of struggling with. And so I think there's this deep desire to maintain the faith, which has not always articulated that it can be hard sometimes. And so this kind of disillusionment, I think, is something that is really quite profound, and helps people recognize and see themselves in the course of faith. I don't have a question. I just think that that's so profound today. And I think we're just seeing it more and more and more.
Sort of a artificiality that we're seeing, or at least people are responding to sort of a presentation of religious expression that doesn't seem authentic anymore.
Absolutely. And has been shown to be inauthentic through the controversies that seem to just come up again and again and again.
Right. And I think you're definitely right in the center of what's going on right now with people feeling dissatisfaction. And then that feeling kind of starts to take over. When there's like this sense of loss and this sense of mourning, like I don't know that I believe the same way that I used to, or the religious expression I've been involved with is is not expansive enough to bring in these conversations. And
Exactly. And so often what happens is people respond to that by saying, oh, you've lost your faith, or you've abandoned, and you just need to believe in Jesus more, and whatever it is. And they don't hold this messy place where you can be fully faithful, fully in love with God, and yet still have a really hard time and really have some questions and some griefs and some things that you're trying to work through.
right, a place for questions
Yeah.
is really important. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Vicky, do you want to jump in? And you may need to come off mute, Vicky.
I'm sorry. Well, I was thinking Kyle just described Job's life, so that's actually really biblical response to God and reaching out in faith with a messy life. I wanted to respond to the prompt David gave earlier about if you have a book in mind that hasn't been written yet, do you know the ending or how you want to end it? The book I have in mind that's being written in the form of blogs, actually. I'm on Substack now, blogging, and that's been really helpful for me getting the book out of me and into a form where other people can read it. And eventually, if I ever publish, it would have a prologue of current events and a date and year as close to publication as possible, with all of the nuts and bolts of publication, describing exactly where we're at in current events, especially politically, because that gears the entire book. And my hope is that my grandchildren someday will pick up the book and it won't be relevant anymore. I don't want my book to be relevant anymore. My book is a response to a lot of what we're seeing in our political climate. And so then the epilogue would be, I have taken this book to peel back the political guys it's a religious facade that politicians and evangelicals or evangelical politicians have disguised themselves as Christian or biblical for about 50 years now. And I've peeled that disguise back, revealed the wolf under the sheep's clothing in this one way, but they will keep trying. So hopefully this book will become irrelevant and unnecessary in another generation, but keep your eyes open because they will be disguising themselves again. Watch out for the next mask, because they will always be after the political power, the material wealth, and the social prestige that comes with wearing the Christian mask or pretending to be.
Sort of a book about modern Pharisees.
I've said that too. And I feel Christian Cobes Dumas does a great job of doing something similar.
Yeah.
And Jesus and John Wayne, I appreciate her insights, her scholarship, historical scholarship, and her insights.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Vicky. That's really interesting that you're trying to write yourself to Sarah's question, rather than thinking about posterity, or we're trying to write us out of that phase. So
Okay. Hi,
you're
Sarah.
working yourself out of a job, writing yourself out of a job. Caroline, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everybody. I'm Caroline Beidler. I just want to say, first off, I have a love-hate relationship with social media, but I was sitting on my couch scrolling and saw this post from David from Lake Drive Books on Instagram about tonight. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I told my husband, I've got to get on this Zoom call. So anyways, I'm excited to be here. And I just want to say, first off, as an author, I'm working on my second book. As an author, I just find it so refreshing that there are folks like yourself who are out there doing something different and working with authors and exploring, what that different looks like, what it can look like. I just appreciate being able to have choices. And I think a lot of times, as I've learned through the process of publishing my first book, a lot of discouragement, disillusionment, excuse me, and some of those things. So anyways, I appreciate that. I have a question, and then I just wanted to just share a little bit, with kind of my ultimate hope for my second book, and just really for everything that I do and for my writing is ultimately to build a relationship with the reader. And so I've really been exploring through my writing and in community. I'm a part of a women's group, a writing group, how to build that connection, whether that's through more conversational, dialogue and approaches, accessible writing. Really want the reader to feel like, hey, we're sitting across from each other, having a conversation, and, ultimately to speak to that person who is seeking God. And, that's another thing that I appreciate, about, I see some familiar faces of folks that I've recognized, on social media, but it feels like a lot of us are approaching our calling really this way, is to speak to that person who is seeking God and seeking a relationship. The question I have for you, because I am working on my second book, is, and I've had conversations about platform development and all of those things, especially around social media. But I'm curious your perspective, David, on the one thing an author should be doing aside from writing, moving into their second book.
Well, I think it gets back to your relationship with your readers and connecting. I guess one of the things I feel like I learned especially in 2022 is how much authors can help each other. And, I've seen, people can get pretty down about social media. Well, my livelihood depends on it. So actually I'm pretty up about it. I mean, Twitter, yeah, I don't know what's going on with Twitter. I don't know that, there's actually a lot of, really good engagement actually going on right now. A lot of good just interaction in general. It just seems down. But I've seen some amazing things on Instagram where people are meeting each other. It might not be the real community, but they actually end up creating community outside of the social platform. And I think that's one of my big lessons this past year, where I'm just seeing authors really helping each other out. Now, some authors who are on a certain level may not give a hand up to an author who's on another level, but you guys can, but if you find people and if you research people, they're out there. There's far more of them out there than you might realize, where you can be assets to each other. But I think just being open and engaging, the big thing that most people in terms of marketing say and publishing these days still is email lists. That's really the best way to create engagement. That becomes the people on your email list are kind of like super fans. They've bought into you more, and that can lead to good engagement with them. It can lead to help you write ideas too that connect to them. I had one author, I had a person write him a big question, and he said, I need to write an article about this, and that showed up a few weeks later. And that actually drove content for him. That got his name out there, that particular author. So I would say that, a good website that's capturing emails and that you actually just send sometimes just short newsletters is all it needs to be. Don't make it something that's daunting for you. One of the complaints I have about Substack is it feels like we're back to the old days of blogging, where you have these long blog entries everybody's got to keep up with. And it's like, I'm getting all these things in my inbox. I don't have time to read all these things. So I wonder how sustainable that particular method is going to be, but I still believe in reaching out to your people through email. Very much so.
Thanks, David. So we have Shar and Colette's hands are up. I know, Shar, your hand's been up for a while, so why don't you go first, and then Colette, can you jump in second? Does that work? I'm sure if you're speaking, you need to come off mute.
I just said the best of what I was gonna say and y'all missed it, so, no, I don't normally, well, doesn't matter. The novel I've written, or I've actually just finished a first draft of young adult novel, narrative nonfiction, and I'm keen to, as I go into the sort of first big edit process, hear your take, David, on what of the themes are trending among young adult literature right now. And so this is it's a sort of a memoir-ish of a young adult who's grown up non-Christian but found Jesus at some point, but then found herself sort of torn in between worlds, like a lot of young people do. You know, there's these churchy friends, and then there's her family that's very not Christian and partying and all that stuff. And she ends up deciding she needs to take off on a walkabout, leave, just take off, hitchhike, just wander the country and figure out who she's supposed to be, like the existential crisis of do I make who I am, or is who I am already made by God, and what is the God of the church my God, or is it something else, and these kinds of questions, and she's striving constantly to figure out, I'm not being the person I want to be at home. I want to maybe escape somewhere else to be this person that I've always wanted to be that I can't be. And the sort of the ending of this book, I know that was one of your questions, but the ending was discovering that I'll never you can't be what if you can't be it at home, you're not going to be it. Do you know what I mean? If discovering that I couldn't run away to be the person I wanted to be, she came up wherever I was. And so I had to figure out that how am I going to take who I want to be home and actually try to be her in that context.
Yeah.
So that's the gist of the story. And I'm interested in, it obviously connects in spiritual themes quite a bit, but yeah.
Yeah,
What
no,
what's your take on that?
I don't think you need me at all. I think you've got a lot going on right there, and you're figuring it out. I mean, to me, I'm definitely hearing the theme of, especially, I talked about institutional structures, not kind of being top heavy, maybe not keeping up with where people are right now. And so as people detach from them, whether it's a church, whether it's corporation, whether it's a family, it's like, hello, me. You're hearing that. I'm hearing that phrase. Oh, hello, me. Who am I? I'm finding out who I am. The problem is it's a little bit of a negative identity because you're not doing it within a community. And so you're kind of, it's a very wilderness space to be. I think that's another theme that people talk about a lot, is they use that word wilderness that so many of us are in. So what you're parsing out in this character's life is, depending on the context, that's one of the big questions, is who am I in this world that I live in now? And how do I be me? How do I acknowledge and accept me? And what does that me look like? Because maybe I've had it defined by so many other people and I've never figured it out for myself, which is definitely a young person's struggle. But I think it's something that spans more than one life stage at this point in time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Colette?
Hi.
I hope I'm saying your name right.
Yes, Colette. Hi, Colette in Portland, Oregon. I just stumbled onto this Zoom call because Marla posted it on her story. So here I am. David, I may have like an overly simplified question for you, but it's just rolling around in my brain because it's like, how do I become a good student of felt needs? Because I feel like for me, I oscillate between like all of the needs and I'm overwhelmed by them. And then also being guilty of being so disconnected as well. I sit in this little box all day long. And I have just like a very small writing, newsletter that I do on a regular basis. And I am so guilty of like writing flowery language that I think sounds good, but doesn't resonate. And so I'm like, okay, that's not landing. And so I'm just curious, like, I want to find the felt needs of the people around me, but what I'm seeing in my generation and in people here over here in the Pacific Northwest is no one's talking anymore. Like no one knows how to talk about spiritual things anymore. And I feel like it takes extra effort for me to break into the spiritual world. And it's like, and I've been a pastor. And so I just feel like it's just such a strange place we're in right now, where there's so much need. And yet we're all still so disconnected from each other. And so how do we become good students of felt needs?
Yeah, I mean it's it's a simplistic answer that you already know, I'm pretty sure, but you describe where are people hurting, you know, where do you see, start with where people are hurting, or start with the problem that you are trying to help them solve. And I'm sure you know plenty of examples about that. I also think too that I like to think a little bit that we need to drop some of the language that we've been using to describe our lives spiritually, and then let's just see what grows there. Let's give it some breathing room, you know, let's let it be fertile again. And maybe we'll find new language. Language is always in motion. And religious language, is no exception to that. I can't possibly answer, you know, I can't possibly help you figure that out entirely, but I think you can trust yourself to keep doing it. That's another thing too with writing that I'm sure all of you experience, is it just takes time. Give it time, keep trying, keep coming back. You end up having to do it more than you might ever think. I'm doing that myself, just trying to grow this business of Lake Drive Books. It's like, okay, that didn't happen as fast as I wanted it to. And to establish like a readership takes time. And I think too, in a world where there's so much disruption going on, we're not connected to each other as well. So it's kind of harder to get things to take. You know, so if you're feeling frustration there, you're not alone, that's for sure. So many of us are, and how do we find that? That's one of the big felt needs we're struggling with, is community itself.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I really appreciate that too, David, that you're saying, you know, start with the problem as a way to dial into the felt need, because I think, you know, for me, I think there can be a temptation to start with the solution. But I think really honing in on what the problems that people have, and then you can offer potential solutions, or at least potential compassion and understanding.
Yeah.
We're at the hour. If anybody has any other, pressing questions or comments, please raise your hand. But I just want to say a couple things about community. So as I was saying at the beginning, I introduced myself. I'm Kate Rademacher, and I really I'm delighted to be taking the baton from Brian Elaine, who founded this platform. And for those of you who didn't see, we're going to have an event tomorrow night that Brian McLaren is going to join, and Joyce Dinkins, to thank Brian Elaine. And I have, for those of you who've worked with him in the past, we have a memory book that we've put together. So I'm going to put the link in 1 second, but I just want to say that one of my priorities moving forward is to cultivate that sense of community. I'm just so thrilled and delighted. So David, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for being here, David. And thank you all for being here, because one of my real priorities and desires for myself and for all of us is to help facilitate more connection and community among writers, particularly who have an interest in spirituality or progressive spirituality. So I'm just really thrilled that that this was such a robust discussion. We had a great turnout. And David, just want to thank you again for your wisdom and perspective from multiple angles. I found this discussion really helpful and enlivening. So thank you so much. Does anybody else have any final questions? Or David, do you want to end with a few thoughts?
Well, I just want to say thanks as well. I do want to encourage folks, if you want to go to lakedrivebooks.com, you'll see the books that we're doing, and some of them speak to some of these felt needs I think I've been talking about personally. Marla Taviano, who hasn't been able to speak, she's here, and she's got a book there, and we've got some other really cool books. Kyle, you talked about people just having questions. We've got a book there on prayer, and it's a book about questions. It's about speaking to God with questions. It's called Amen. I recommend you check that out. You know, I bring it up not just as a commercial plug, really, but also because this is a new thing that we're building. We need everyone's help. These authors could use your interest. If it's not the right time for you to buy a book from them, maybe follow them on social media, watch and see what they're doing and interact with them. I think there's a lot to be gained there. And in a way, too, this Lake Drive Books enterprise is itself creating community, and it's great to see that community interacting with the Writing for Your Life community. I think those things are very real. So thanks, Kate, for this opportunity. I really appreciate it. It's been great to see everybody here. Thank you for coming.
And I'm going to put your website in the chat, lakedrivebooks.com. Is that right?
Yes.
And you also have another platform for your agenting work. Is that right? Maybe you can stick that in the chat too.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. That's called hyponymous. It's a made-up word. Because if you're trying to get a brand online, you got to do something that's not going to be already taken.
Well, again, thank you to David, and thank you to everyone who participated. Really enjoyed this conversation. We're going to have our next Tuesday, our next second Tuesday is going to be actually on the first Tuesday on February 7th, because the second Tuesday is Valentine's Day. So stay tuned for more information about our next speaker, and hope to see everyone maybe tomorrow night. So thanks again, David, and looking forward to future events through Writing for Your Life. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you, David. Thank you, Kate.